Hi, this is the first of a series of videos dedicated to those who want to learn how to play the cajon, how to make it sound good, amplify it, record it, know its history, in other words, who want to know more about the cajon and get the most out of it. My name is Paolo De Gregorio. I'm a cajon maker, and I will start this video by dividing the cajon into two categories, the snareless and the snare cajon. Both versions of the cajon have their origin in Peru, as far back as 1850. But while the snareless type has been the first choice for the great majority of Peruvian players, the snare version became hugely popular in Spain, starting from 1980, and in the rest of the world with the beginning of the new century. The snare cajon is the one that features metallic devices inside of it, strings, wires, or similar objects that, making contact with the playing board, resonate with it by sympathy when hit, creating a buzz, a snarey sound. That's the reason why it became so popular worldwide. It features some similarities with the drum kit, more specifically the combination of the snare drum and bass drum action that is the foundation for most popular music nowadays. So we're going to focus on the snare cajon in this video. The presence or absence of snares in the cajon is important because it defines the sweet spot. That's the area where the cajon sounds at its most resonant, and in the case of the snare type, at its most sensitive too. So we need to understand where is the sweet spot of each type of cajons before we start playing them, because our hands will have to act in different areas of the soundboard, especially when it comes to the sharp sound. If we remove the front plate of a snare cajon, we will find in most cases metal strings running vertically against the back of the panel, so it becomes clear that if we want to trigger them, we need to hit the biggest portion of them as possible. And that implies necessarily a stroke that involves all of our fingers, well below the top part of the cajon. Instinctively, we may be thinking that the upper part of the cajon is the one that will produce the highest tone, but if we do that, we are actually missing the snare and the extra high pitch that it provides. With the help of these pictures, we can see the snare and snareless cajon's sweet spots next to each other. Regarding the bass playing area, there are no relevant difference between the two, but when it comes to the sharp, we see that the snare cajon's sweet spot is further down on the front plate compared to the snareless cajon. The main consequence of this is that the hand action on a snare cajon happens on a more compact area than a snareless cajon, where the hands will move with more of an up and down motion. Here we can see a quick example of two professional players in action with the two types of cajon. The picture shows that the main difference consists in the hand placement for the sharp tone. There is one more thing that is clearly affected by the presence of a snare, and that is the way we sit on the cajon. On a snare cajon, there is a specific way of producing the sharp tone, which involves the use of a pivoting action of the hand on the top part of the cajon, necessary to project all of our fingers the furthest down on the playing board as possible, to trigger the snares. So we need to leave room in this area of the cajon by sitting as backward as we can. On a snareless cajon, we don't need to throw all of our fingers onto the front plate, so we can sit more up front. For this reason, a deeper cajon is more comfortable for the snare type and is recommendable. So let's have a look at the sharp tone. The main idea is to use our arms as a whip, our hands with a fork type shape, with the fingers slightly apart from each other, relaxed but straight. This whipping action of the arm is complemented by the palm hitting a pivot point that is right on the top part of the cajon, so that our fingers will hit the soundboard as a consequence of these two events. If we break down this movement in various stages, we can see that the first one will be our elbow, starting by loading the stroke. We would then recall the elbow towards our body and transmit the energy towards our wrist, which will start leading the way of our hand, kind of dragging behind. The fourth stage is a compound action of three events happening together at once. First of all, our wrist will project the hand for the last part of its journey, providing extra leverage and momentum, and throwing our palm onto the top part of the cajon, more or less by the corner, so that our fingers will be projected against the surface for the final impact. At this point, we have two options. If we let our fingers bounce off the surface, we will have an open, sharp tone, whereas if we keep them stuck to the surface, the tone will be more muted. Letting the fingers bounce off the front plate doesn't mean that we need to come away from the cajon as if it was a burning object though. Our palm will maintain contact with the top part of the cajon. Only the fingers will come away. During the stroke, our hands need to maintain a line of the forearm in order to function at their best. If you disrupt the forearm line too much, chances are that you will strain your wrists, and the overall leverage action over your joints won't be as smooth and effective. The landing position of the sharp tone is the same that we are going to use in order to perform the ghost note, or an accented note. This note is obtained by just tapping slightly the front plate with the tip of the fingers and trigger the snare behind it. A good quality snare cajon will deliver a clean and precise ghost note without much pressure. It's very important that we are able to play the ghost notes evenly and precisely, because those are the ones which are going to give texture and dynamics to our playing. So practice them at various time subdivisions and mix them with sharp accented notes in order to get used to this shadow and light dosing effect, which is what will make our cajon playing more interesting. Let's now talk about the bass tone. The main difference from the sharp tone is that it's performed with a pressing action of our hand rather than a whipping one. The other big difference is that it's played with the palm rather than the fingers. The shape of the hand will remain the same as the sharp tone, with our fingers slightly separated, relaxed but straight. The sweet spot of the bass is just a few inches down compared to the sharp tone. We just need to get our wrist in line with the top part of the cajon to get the most resonant bass. Going further down won't give us a deeper bass. On the contrary, it will be more medium ranged than the one performed on the upper third of the cajon. As well as for the sharp tone, we can get an open tone if we lift our fingers from the soundboard, or a more muted one if we rest them on it. Lifting the fingers doesn't mean that we really need to stretch our fingers back though. Otherwise, we would hit the cajon with a tensed up hand, and it won't sound as good. Plus our hands would get tired pretty quickly. Just lift the tip of the finger slightly to get that fullness of sound. It is also possible to play the ghost note from the bass tone position, which is actually very useful when performing fast tempos without having to constantly shift hand positions. Just like for the sharp tone, it's necessary to tap the front plate with the fingertips. So now that we have the two basic tones and 4 different ways of performing them, let's combine them all together in a sort of warming up routine, starting with a slow subdivision and doubling it up a couple of times. The next step will be to achieve a more musical purpose, like building a basic rock pattern. Now we can add the ghost notes to create a similar motion to a hi-hat blending the bass and snare pattern. There are many more sounds that can be achieved from the snare cajon. The aim of this video was to give you the 2 basic tones to get started, but here is an example of other types of strokes and interesting rhythms performed by a professional player. These techniques are basically taken from flamenco cajon, a musical genre where the snare cajon has been played intensively for more than 30 years. There is a whole scene of players who developed a specific technique for this type of instrument, and it's worth checking it out. With these basic concepts, you can get started on the snare cajon. And if you want to learn more, I recommend our tuitional methods, Cajon Power and El Cajon Flamenco, made by amazing players with a lot of informative material. We will be back with more videos on different topics of the cajon, such as tuning, amplification, recording, and even the history of this instrument. So thanks for watching, and see you soon!